good morning. Just a few, let me introduce myself. I'm Karen Fogus. I am the COC supervisor for the city of Tucson, and I'm delighted to be here. This is my first webinar to host, so um, I'm excited that actually this is the one because striving for racial justice is my heart. So just some housekeeping items. Participants will be muted throughout the presentation. Submit your question using the Q&A feature in Zoom, the chat. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded, and the webinar materials will be provided at the TPCH Online Training Center within the week. The training center includes dozens of on-demand webinars related to homelessness, housing, federal programs, and best practices for homeless assistance programs. Those are free and available to TPCH member agency staff and volunteers, and you sign up by visiting tpch.net and selecting e-learning. And I can tell you firsthand from having been partaking of those myself, they are awesome. So please do avail yourself. My partner in this presentation is Austin Puka. And so thank you, Austin, for your help and assistance. And it's my pleasure to introduce Claudia Powell. She's with the University of Arizona Southwest Institute for Research on Women. She's the Associate Director and Research Professor. And among other roles at CIRO, she's the Program Director for Anchor, which provides trauma-informed systems of care that include linkages to housing, healthcare, case management, substance abuse, and mental health treatment, as well as support services in the community. She's committed to engaging in culturally competent, community-based participatory action research done in conjunction with communities in collaboration. So that's exactly what she's done with regard to this project. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin to talk a little bit about how this project came to be.
Thank you, Karen. And I just want to first really thank Claudia and the University of Arizona for your wonderful partnership and continued commitment to our community and preventing and ending homelessness. I almost said youth homelessness, which segues me into how this project got started. And so for those of you all in the room, I am the Community Services Project Coordinator on our COC team that oversees our youth homelessness demonstration project. And that demonstration project, we've had the pleasure of working with 3 different entities in the community, and the University of Arizona CIRO is one of them in that planning and development and implementation. And the YHDP project is a project from HUD that asked communities to really pause and re-examine the ways in which they tackle youth homelessness and needs of young people experiencing homelessness in their community. And so in our community's efforts over the past 3.5, 4 years, probably longer, CIRO was really instrumental in that. And in that process, YHDP asked communities to bring folks with lived experience to the forefront of planning, development, implementation, and evaluation ongoing. And so for YHDP, that meant to really support bolstering the Continuum's Youth Action Committee. And so along TPCH, the Youth Action Committee, or YAC, is our only committee in our continuum that is one that is built of folks of lived and living experience. And so early in YHDP, YAC members were participating in an initiative that was focused on elevating and empowering Black, Indigenous, youth of color, and LGBTQ young people experiencing homelessness in the community. And with COVID-19 and everything, kind of shaken up our participation in that initiative. It suffered some like really some downtime that our community really couldn't afford. We're all committed, as Karen said, striving and hopefully reaching and continuing to expand our definition and unlearning and relearning what it means to be co-conspirators and dismantling racism. And so Youth Action Committee reached out to Ciro, and Claudia was there for that conversation. So when they asked them, can we pivot our participation in this initiative and call on our community, why are we asking folks nationally when we're here at home? And so I'm so grateful to Claudia and the wonderful team of community members that Ciro gathered for this call to action. And I'm really excited for our community to dig into it and to start to really implement these steps, not only into the work that we do as a continuum, but the way that we engage and work with each other as individuals and community members. So I'm so grateful and humbled, and I'm really excited for Claudia to kick us off. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Austin. That was such a very nice introduction, and thanks to all of you who are here. It was nice before. Now I'm in a little bit of a strange view in Zoom and my presentation, but before that, I could see some of the folks who were here, and it was nice to see people who I've known for a really long time and some new people. So thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Claudia Powell, as mentioned, and I am a researcher at the University of Arizona, Ciro. And Ciro is a group of community-based researchers, and our primary work that we do is in conjunction with community-based agencies. And so we strive to improve services, to consider folks who are underserved, and to help agencies provide the best service they can, in addition to some services that we also provide. So the name Southwest Institute for Research on Women isn't necessarily a great indicator of all of the work that we do. And this is a part of the work that we do that kind of falls, some people might not know that Ciro is involved in. And so I personally, in no way am an expert on racial justice, but I was very excited to get to be a part of this initiative and facilitate some of the process. So first, I'd like to read some acknowledgements. First, our land acknowledgement. We are currently occupying unceded lands of the Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui people. With a land acknowledgement, action must follow. Action looks like being in solidarity with Indigenous resistance and fighting for land back, which includes demanding the rightful return of land to Indigenous peoples, preserving languages and traditions, and ensuring food sovereignty, housing, and clean air and water. And a labor acknowledgement. The United States resides on native land and was built on the backs of kidnapped and enslaved Africans. The state of Arizona is comprised of approximately 5% African Americans, yet 19% of people experiencing homelessness in Arizona are Black or African American. And like I said earlier, I am in no way an expert in this area. And when we started this process, as Austin mentioned, it was a part of a different initiative, which was the Away Home America Grand Challenge. And Ciro took on that project really in an effort to learn and learn ways that our community could be more just for people of various races and ethnicities and people who belong to the LGBTQ community. So in an effort to shift, I called upon lots of community members, and one of them learned really quickly is that people who do this kind of work or who are really skilled and talented, have thought a lot about it, are very busy. And so that's something to keep in mind that this is a very small list of the talent and depth in our community. So I would really like to thank Casey Chimney Star Limon Conde, Marisol Flores Aguirre, Ana Harper Guerrero, Mildred Manuel, Andres Portela, Claudio Rodriguez, and we also had, who's not listed here, but an outside editor who is an expert in another state, and her name is Gabby Parsons. I also have to thank the agencies who funded it and prioritized it. And that is the City of Tucson, Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness, and CIRO. So thanks for bearing with me through that. So the process we've talked about a little bit, that this was funded from as a part of the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project. But then because of COVID, we had to shift and we had to think about, what is it that we need in our community as far as thinking about racial justice, and how can we get that? How can we accomplish this? So we've had some really amazing national technical assistance up to this point. Some strong facilitators, agencies who participated, and so we thought, well, that's one way we could partner with one of the national agencies and develop something that's more specific to our community. And when we originally started this process, we were thinking about developing a toolkit. And then Tucson and Pima County are such unique places that we decided to again shift and identify local leaders who are committed to racial justice and to all of these issues, and to think about strategies that local organizations could take to implement and address racial inequities. So we also know that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Organizations themselves are the best suited to determine their own best plan. They have to work with stakeholders, clients, community members, staff, leadership to determine what is needed in their organization and as equal partners. Many organizations started racial justice work, and there were several who started in the summer of 2020 and issued statements and had a lot of enthusiasm around racial justice work or DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work at that time. And for some agencies, that was it. They issued a statement, and it's not to say that the agencies aren't committed, but it fell off the priority list. And other agencies did more. They got started, they probably developed a committee, took some steps, probably recognized how difficult it was to engage in this work, and then may feel stalled, or maybe that efforts have been ineffective. So, and so what we realized is that there's so many toolkits that already exist and so many resources. So through the process, this document turned into a call to action. So this document is calling to action agencies who are committed to racial justice work, those who may have issued a statement in support of Black Lives Matter or against police brutality, and who want to move forward in their organization, but just not sure how. So the document in itself includes so many toolkits and resources. So there's access to all of those within the call to action. So what is racial justice? And like I said earlier, the project started in thinking about racial equity. And then that shifted and we started to think about, well, and it wasn't that we started to think about, it was that the strategies and actions that we were talking about were much more in line with racial justice than they were with racial equity, which is also included. So what is racial justice? According to Race Forward, racial justice is the systemic fair treatment of people from different races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice goes beyond anti-racism It's not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of intentional systems and resources which produce and sustain racial justice through proactive and preventative measures. So in our conversations with this group of local leaders, we really recognized that we need to get serious about implementing structural changes, and that we need to think as much about the distribution of resources and opportunities as we need to think as much about the barriers as we do about the distribution of resources and opportunities. So also contained in the call to action is some background information and some foundational knowledge. So those reading it are on the same page. We know that not everybody comes to this work with the same level of experience and expertise, and we really wanted to provide some of that in the call to action so that it wasn't foreign as the terms weren't foreign as people moved through the document. So the actions really touch on all four types of racism. Internalized racism refers to individual biases and ideas about race that are within us, that we're predisposed to. Maybe there's the things that we were taught as children, and it's typically pertains to social groups, racialized messages about our social groups. And so these are some of the, when we talk about internal bias, this is the area where that kind of racism falls. It's within us. Interpersonal racism is the one that we think about the most, or the one that we give the most sort of credit to. It's racism between people. So it's the cultural messages, but they're shared through personal interactions. So it's not just what we're thinking and feeling inside, but it's how we treat other people and interact with people in different groups in a racialized way. And these interactions typically include some people and exclude others. Institutional and structural racism are the ones that have come more to the forefront recently. They're certainly not new, but I think more people are aware of these kinds of racism. So institutional racism refers to institutions and organizations adopting or maintaining policies and procedures that result in inequitable outcomes for people of color. Institutional racism may occur within schools, courts, military, government organizations, businesses, within our own organizations. And some of these practices lead to disparities in employment, education, incarceration, healthcare, and other. And we know that there are some institutional racism that also leads to disparities in racial disparities in homelessness. Structural racism is also newer for some people, and it really is referring to our history and the way that historical, social, psychological, cultural, and political norms perpetuate advantages based on race. So examples of this include the racial disparities across wealth, educational attainment, life expectancy, access to resources, and housing. So by now, most of us have seen this picture and have a good understanding of what's being represented. So it's, thinking about the differences between equality and equity, and understanding that not everybody needs the exact same thing to achieve the same outcomes. And some of you also on this call are probably really familiar with targeted universalism. And if you are a member of the Youth Action Committee, you certainly are, because that is the youth homelessness movement has really talked a lot about targeted universalism. And so there's steps involved in that. And I think that it's easy to understand maybe when we apply it to something else. So let's say we have a grove of fruit trees. And this particular grove of fruit trees just isn't doing very well. It's not producing a lot of fruit. Let's say in general that maybe across the nation, 80% of fruit trees are producing. So we think about this grove that we have and we're like, we want our grove to produce 80% or 80% of the trees to be producing fruit as well. We want it to be doing well in general. So we're deciding, okay, well, we're going to set a goal of 80% of our trees are producing fruit. So after we've set the goal, we need to take a look at what do we have in our grove? Well, we have apple trees, we have orange trees, we have peach trees, pear trees. And now let's look at how each of them are doing. Not all combined as one, but separated. So how are the apple trees doing? How are the orange tree doing, et cetera? So if we learn that maybe our apple trees are doing better than our peach trees, why? Is it because our fertilizer is designed for apples? Is it because our farmer has never dealt with peaches before and he really has a lot of experience in apples, but he's just never done peaches? Maybe he needs new training, or maybe we need a new farmer. Is it because apples have been nurtured? The farmer's there watering the apples every day, but has kind of ignored the peaches because he didn't have a lot of experience and didn't know exactly how to treat the peaches. So from there, because we know we want all of our trees, or we want 80% of our trees to produce fruit, and we don't want it to, we know we don't want 100% of our apples, but only 10% of our peaches. So we decide we need to implement a plan for the apples and the peaches. So obviously, if our apples are doing really well, we can stick with some of those strategies for the apples. It's working, we've got it. But we might need a different plan for the peaches. We might need different fertilizer. We might need different, a different watering schedule. We might need to train our farmer. So when the plans, so then we implement these plans. Okay, it's not exactly the same plan. It's a different plan, but our goal is for the same outcome, 80% of those particular trees producing fruit. And after we've implemented this new plan that might look different for apples and peaches, we have to evaluate this plan to make sure it's working. And so we give our plan a little bit of time, and then we move forward in looking at the different fruit trees and thinking about how it's going and measuring how it's going, looking at our data. And if we're seeing improvements, but there's still disparities, we might go back to the table and have conversations about what might work. And different than fruit trees and people, we need to include the people who we're serving in those conversations. And here's another infographic that demonstrates an opportunity structure. And so this shows us that different people may need different steps, different structures, and different programming to reach the same goals. And so one of the challenges can be that people think, well, we can't just have programs that target certain people, and that doesn't work, and that's not fair. But if we're striving for equal outcomes, we certainly need a variety of programs and strategies to help people reach the goal. One of the things that we had to keep in mind when we started this project is some of the unique characteristics of where we live, which is Pima County. And I personally think that Pima County is extraordinary. I think it's a great place to live. And one of the reasons that it was so exciting to do this work was knowing that so many people in our community are committed to this work. So what do we know about Pima County? We know that there's over 1 million people. It's very spread out. We know that it sits on tribal lands. We're 65 miles from the US-Mexico international border. We have a large number of indigenous people. And also includes a large immigrant community. Vibrant Latinx culture, small, tight-knit Black and African American community. And we know that there's been challenges for Black and African American residents to maintain Black communities. And so this is just a few of the things I pulled out of the call to action, and that goes a little deeper into it. But when we're thinking about racial justice, I do think that we have to consider the place where we live. Where we live is not the same as everywhere else. And the proximity to the international border, the notion of borders themselves that were erected at some point in time. And we know that in our community, some people, people who lived in community were divided by the border. So there are special things to consider as we move forward in thinking about racial justice work in our community. We also don't talk a lot about language justice, but we really need to be thinking about this given that almost 1/4 of households in Pima County speak Spanish at home. And that does not necessarily mean that everybody is a first language Spanish speaker, but that's such a large number of people who that's the language they have their conversations in at home, that we really need to consider how our agencies are approaching language justice. And I think that we might be hard pressed to find other communities that have such a large number of people who are speaking one other language at home. So sometimes when we start having conversations about language justice, an easy out is, well, we can't have documents in every single language that every single person speaks. No, we probably can't. But when almost 1/4 of the people who live here speak a language other than English, we probably need to think more deeply about the ways that we include people who speak Spanish in our documents and in our communication. So what is language justice? It's an evolving framework based on the notion of respecting every individual's fundamental language rights to be able to communicate, understand, and be understood in the language in which they prefer and feel most articulate and powerful. Rejecting the notion of the supremacy of one language, it recognizes that language can be a tool of oppression, and as well an important part of exercising autonomy and of advancing racial and social justice. And so if you've ever been somewhere where you had to communicate in a language that you weren't so comfortable, I think that you can very much relate to the statement that language is power. So like I said earlier, there's no step-by-step plan to achieve racial justice that can be applied across organization. It just doesn't exist. But taking action towards becoming a racially just organization is a unique journey for each organization, as they may have different concerns, barriers, stakeholders. And the strategies contained in this call to action may not be relevant to all organizations, and some may need to bolster specific areas. So in addition to that, working towards racial equity isn't a project that can be completed in just a certain period of time. Like, we're going to take this year and become a racially just organization. That isn't the way this will work. And I think for agencies who have started the process, they can probably really relate to that. That it really includes an ongoing organizational shift, and includes understanding the impact of our history and committing to dismantling these systems. So these are the 7 actions that the group came up with. And so just to sort of orient you a little bit to the call to action. So under each action, there are several strategies that an organization could take to work on that particular action. And then there are several resources that will help an organization implement the strategies. So our 7 actions are organization leadership publicly commits to racial justice. Action 2, collective racial justice work within the organization. Action 3 was individual racial justice work. Action 4, determine desired outcomes. Action 5, build racial justice and or minimize harm. Action 6, commit to accountability. 7, embrace the journey and continue the work. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these actions, and I've listed some example, some of the strategies, so they're examples, but in the call to action, there's many more. So action 1 is organization leadership publicly committing to racial justice. So, and that happened for a lot of organizations during the summer of 2020. The leadership committed to racial justice and made public statements and may have made some public proclamation to their staff, to their stakeholders. And that's really important because so often, and especially within organizations in Pima County, there aren't a lot of executive directors and leaders who are people of color. And so it's important for the leadership to make those proclamations for other people to feel comfortable doing that work within the organization. Some of the strategies are hiring an outside organization or consultant to help with it. It may be easier for people within the organization if it's not a person, another person within the organization leading these efforts. Forming a group charged with leading these efforts. And one of the challenges is that we know, like I was saying earlier, the people who do racial justice work in our community are so busy, they're tapped out and tired because people are asked all the time to serve on different committees, to participate in initiatives like this, and to share their expertise in a number of ways. So while it doesn't necessarily have to be led by people of color absolutely need to be included in these efforts. And in addition to that, people should be compensated for this additional labor rather than to be expected to take this on in addition to their everyday work. And that's one of the ways that this work falls by the wayside, that it's just, also instead of a priority. Leadership should begin to consider and challenge all aspects of the current structure and the systems in place. If you're reading this call to action as an organizational leader and then starting to think, okay, I need to be more involved in this, we already have a group, respect the efforts of the people who have been doing that work, because people may have been involved in this work for quite some time. And then also really embrace what it means to be doing the work and all of the challenges that you'll face. This work isn't easy. It's hard work, and it is, the conversations are difficult. It's emotionally exhausting. And that is, I think that's for everybody, but for particularly considering the burden it places on people of color. And also, at this point, and I've heard this across, people are kind of tired of hearing about this. If it doesn't pertain specifically to them, it can feel like, okay, I know, I've heard all about this, and we're treating everybody the same, and I'm tired of it. So considering the approach you take and addressing those nuances of understanding that treating everybody the same isn't necessarily the way to achieve racial justice. So the action 2 is when an organization is coming together to work on to do racial justice work. So it may include the leadership and staff and clients and stakeholders. It may be a larger group that represents the organization, and really going through multiple aspects of the organizational structure to think about how racial justice might impact those areas. So revising a mission and vision statement to incorporate a racial justice lens. Examining the organization's human resource department. There was a lot of conversation in our groups about human resources and how that's the group that we look to for resolving conflict and making decisions about when there is supervisor staff conflict or staff to staff conflict or whatever that might be. And so does the human resources department have experience and knowledge about racial justice and some of the complicated dynamics between people with regard to race? Another strategy is to analyze data based on race and ethnicity. So many of our agencies collect so much data, but then when we go to look at that data and analyze it, we don't necessarily look at it by race and ethnicity. So we don't know if, for example, Black people are doing better or worse than white people. And if there are disparities in that, considering the reasons why there might be disparities. And more radical is agencies reconsidering alignment with funders and partners whose values are rooted in white supremacy. So, not all money is good money. And sometimes it makes a very strong statement for an agency to say, we're not going to take money from this organization anymore because they are not rooted in racial justice. Action 3 is individual work. And so individual work is tricky because obviously we cannot force people to change internally if they are not interested in doing so. But what we can do is to, 1, take steps to do that personally. And 2 is to provide opportunities for staff and other people to do that work. So some of the strategies in doing that are considering ways that your implicit biases may impact how you operate. Also acknowledging the ways that white supremacy may have provided advantages in your life. And keeping in mind that even it's not only white people who have benefited from some aspects of white supremacy. Lots of people have benefited from some aspects of white supremacy. So really challenging where have those areas been in your life? Acknowledging the ways that you may have caused harm to other people as a result of racial bias, nationalism, or language discrimination. And that's certainly one of the things that I have had to wrestle with. Is at CIRO, we do so much community-based research, and we don't always have a person who speaks Spanish. We have people who speak Spanish, but they may not always be on a particular project. And when that happens, when we can't properly work with people who speak Spanish, we're not including their voices in a way that's meaningful or authentic. So as much as prioritizing community and justice is a part of who I am and my work, there's always areas where we need to do better. Check your privileges in meetings and in other community spaces. Sometimes there's group agreements and a lot of times there's not. So when there's not, really thinking about the way that you step up and then step back and give other people opportunities to speak, and when people are sharing information, how that's incorporated. So is it that only people who are in leadership roles, opinions matter, or are people who are clients or stakeholders or community members, do their voices matter as well? And finally, challenging the ways that we have all been taught to interact with clients. So this really led to an interesting discussion among the group. There are certain standards of the way that we operate and interact with clients, and we talk about boundaries and professionalism, and have in our minds a hierarchical framework. And this is not rooted in communities of color. That's not the way people of color interact with each other. And that's not the way we might have the best results with people. So thinking about what you've been taught and challenging whether that's the right way or is that just one way. Determine desired outcomes. And again, I won't talk long about this one because we talked about it earlier, that we should be thinking about outcomes, equal outcomes for different racial and ethnic groups, and developing objectives and goals, and involving all stakeholders, including clients, community members, staff, in the development of goals, and being transparent about that. So sharing that data, actually following up on it. So set the goals and then setting the goals and then following up on that data is really important. So looking at data 6 months from now, are we making improvements in this area? And sharing that back to the stakeholders. So then if you have implemented those suggestions that stakeholders have made, then you may need to go back and think of other ideas to help people meet those goals if they haven't been effective. Building racial justice and or minimizing harm. And in this action area, we thought a lot about staff, and staff members at times have to serve as cultural brokers. So, and we know some of the ways that we do this are when we have one person who speaks Spanish, we're always asking that person to do that translation work. And some agencies pay a differential for that, others don't. So, and there are other ways that staff members serve as cultural brokers, and that is if you have one Black person, you may ask that Black person to continually work with certain aspects of the Black community that you work with, or with Black clients, or thinking about maybe issues that tend to be more specific to the Black community. In thinking about programming, providing programming that is rooted in the understanding of historical generation and current trauma. It's not all of the trauma that's being inflicted upon people is not historical or generational. There's a lot of current things that are happening specifically to racial and ethnic bias that are happening right now. So really taking that into consideration in designing programming. Thinking about hiring policies, procedures, and practices. We all love to think that we do some unbiased things when we're hiring. And the fact of the matter is, even if you have this rubric, that's great, you're going to rate everybody, there's an individual rating that person. So there's bias in that. Infusing resources into the community the organization serves. So when an organization sits in a particular community, we know that we're bringing clients to that space and serving those clients, but in what ways are we serving the community where that organization is? Are we giving back and including and infusing our resources into that particular community? And acknowledging that all organizations in this county are built on stolen tribal lands. How can we make meaningful contributions to tribal communities? Action 6 is committing to accountability. So evaluating your progress on a regular schedule. We talked a little bit about this in the data and outcomes, sharing your progress and monitoring ongoing work of the group to ensure that you're continuing to meet, that you have continued to prioritize this work, and that people within the group are also feeling valued and that their perspectives are heard within that process. And finally, action 7 is embrace the journey and continue the work. And that is really that it's committing to doing racial justice work, like I said earlier, is not a 1 year or 1 6-month plan. It's a commitment to make an organizational shift in that striving toward racial justice is just what the organization does now. Just like the organization may provide substance abuse treatment or something else, they're also continuing to do that, or prioritizes professional development. They also prioritize racial justice work. So, maintaining a group that is committed and an understanding that the people on the group may rotate in and out, but the group itself is maintained. That the organization shares, or people in the interview process are sharing expectations of racial justice. So new hires understand what they're coming into. And that those people are also expected that in the onboarding process to participate in some form of racial justice training. Also creating innovative strategies, book clubs, activism, cultural activities for people to continue to engage in it in an informal way. And celebrate organizational and individual accomplishments. So there's a lot of steps along the way, there's a potential for a lot of accomplishments and successes along the way. And so knowing that there's not an end to this process, it's important to celebrate when you're proud of something that you've done well. And also when outcomes have been, particular objectives or outcomes have been achieved. And I think I am, just right at the end, but if there are questions, I would be happy to take them. And if anybody would like more information, I know that the call to action is on the TPCH website and it's available there. But if you have any questions for me personally, you can contact me with that information. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you everyone for joining. It looks like Karen is working through unmuting folks. If anyone, had any questions and wanted to raise their hand or unmute and ask them, you're welcome to. Yes,
I am giving people the option to talk, to ask questions.
I think the University of Arizona, Southwest Institute for Research on Women, and all of the lovely folks that supported in this project again. You said, even though I've read the entire call to action and participated in some of those conversations, even today you said some things, Claudia, have my wheels turning. So I think that it's, you know, it speaks to the very beginning. You said this is ongoing. And so I'm grateful for all of y'all that joined today. Obviously, you're committed to that ongoing work too. Karen, I'll let you take us on out of here.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate all of your time and your, like Austin said, commitment to racial justice work.
Would also encourage everybody to read that report. I think that Claudia talked about a lot of strategies. It is chock full of ideas on how to integrate racial justice into your organization. So please do take a look. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.